I still remember that day like it was yesterday. It was a beautiful Saturday afternoon, and I was at the old baseball stadium downtown to catch the Sycamores take on their biggest rivals, the Boilermakers. I had scored some decent seats along the third baseline, not too far from the action. As I was settling in with my hot dog and beer, this gorgeous brunette came walking down the aisle, looking for her seat. Our eyes met for a second, and I felt an instant spark. She flashed me a smile that could light up the whole stadium as she squeezed past me to get to her seat. "Excuse me," she said in the sweetest voice. I mumbled something stupid in response, already kicking myself for not being smoother. A few innings later, there was a close play at third base that had both teams arguing with the umpire. The brunette turned to me and asked, "What did you think? Was he safe or out?" I launched into my best impression of an MLB umpire, analyzing the play from multiple angles. She laughed at my overblown antics, and just like that, we were chatting away like old friends. By the seventh inning stretch, I had learned that her name was Chloe. She was a grad student at State, and she was definitely rooting for the other team. A Boilermaker fan? No way that was going to work between us. But I was already a goner for this girl. We ended up closing down the stadium that night, talking and laughing until they finally kicked us out. From that day on, Chloe and I were inseparable. Sure, we had our differences. She was a Purdue alum, and I bled Sycamore blue and white. But it didn't matter. We were crazy about each other, and we made it work. A few years later, I proposed to her on the pitcher's mound of that same baseball stadium after sneaking onto the field late at night. She said yes, of course, and we had a beautiful wedding ceremony surrounded by our family and friends. The first few years of our marriage were pure bliss. We bought a little farmhouse on the outskirts of town and spent our evenings tending to the garden out back or just relaxing on the porch, talking about our days. Chloe had landed her dream job at a marketing firm downtown, and I was teaching English lit over at State. Life was good, you know? But then things started changing for Chloe at work. She got promoted to project manager for this huge national campaign they had landed. I could sense the pressure she was under, but Chloe being Chloe, she refused to let it show. She started staying later and later at the office, putting in crazy hours to make sure every detail was perfect. Her OCD, which had always been pretty mild and manageable, just went into overdrive. At first, I tried to be supportive. I'd make sure to have a hot meal waiting for her when she finally made it home at night. On the weekends, I'd give her full body massages to help her relax. I took over doing all the laundry, cleaning, yard work, anything I could to take some things off her plate. For a little while, it seemed to help. Chloe would come home, eat the dinner I'd prepared, and let me pamper her a bit. She'd give me that smile that still made my heart skip a beat and say, "Thanks, babe. I don't know what I'd do without you." But after about 6 weeks of this routine, something shifted. My gestures, which had once been welcomed and appreciated, started getting brushed aside. Chloe would wave away the plate of food I'd made, saying she'd just grab something later. The massages that used to relax her now seemed to irritate her. "Less, not now, okay? I've got way too much on my mind." She started staying even later at the office, coming home way after I'd gone to bed. On the rare nights she was home earlier, she'd just veg out on the couch, scrolling mindlessly on her iPad instead of engaging with me like she used to. I missed my wife, you know? It was like living with a total stranger. The sweet, caring, fun-loving woman I'd married had been replaced by this high-strung workaholic that I couldn't even recognize anymore. I tried not to take it personally at first, but after a while, it was just too much. I ended up unloading all my worries on my buddy Paul one night over beers at our local haunt. "I don't know what to do, man," I told him. "It's like Chloe and I are just roommates now. Roommates who never talk or do anything together." I shook my head, staring down into my drink. Is this what marriage is supposed to be like after just 4 years? Paul furrowed his brow, taking a sip of his beer. "That's really rough, Les. I gotta be honest, I never thought you two would be having issues this big so soon. You were so crazy about each other when you first got married." He paused, studying me for a moment before asking, Have you two still been intimate at all recently?" I felt my cheeks flush a little at his question, But after downing the last of my beer, I admitted, no man, not for over 3 weeks now. Paul's eyes widened a bit at that. There was an awkward silence between us as the weight of that statement hung in the air. Finally, he spoke up again, his voice low and serious. Les, have you thought that maybe, is it possible Chloe has, left you? For someone else? I recoiled at the suggestion, shaking my head vehemently. No way, man. Chloe's not like that. She's under a ton of pressure with this project at work, that's all. It's really important to her career. I knew Chloe had been distant lately, but there was no way my wife would ever cheat on me. Paul had to be wrong about that, right? After that conversation with Paul, I just couldn't shake the nagging doubt he had planted in my mind. Chloe and I had been so deliriously happy together for years. Was it really possible she could have thrown all that away for someone else? I had to know for sure. A few days later, I decided to pay Chloe a surprise visit at her office during the lunch hour. I picked up a couple of pizzas from her favorite place downtown, hoping the familiar smell would lure her away from her desk for a bit. When I arrived at her office, I asked the receptionist to let Chloe know I was there with lunch. The receptionist raised an eyebrow at me. Apparently, it wasn't too common for husbands to just drop in unannounced like this. While I was waiting in the lobby, 2 guys I didn't recognize came striding in. They looked to be in their late 20s, both wearing crisp suits that probably cost more than my monthly salary. One was tall and lean with shaggy blonde hair, while the other was more muscular with a shaved head. They gave me a dismissive once-over as they approached the receptionist's desk. "Afternoon, Denise," the blonde one said with a cocky grin. "We're back from that client meeting over at the Marriott. Any calls for me while I was out?" The receptionist, Denise, rolled her eyes. "Like you ever take calls when you're out, meeting clients, Brad." She smirked at the other guy. "How about you, Clark? You two have fun racking up that expense account again?" Clark chuckled as they started heading towards the interior offices. "What can I say? The client insisted on putting us up in the penthouse suite. Wouldn't be very good hospitality if we refused, now would it?" I couldn't help but glare after these 2 arrogant frat boy types as they swaggered away. Were these the kind of guys Chloe had been spending all her time with lately? Maybe Paul was onto something after all. Just then, Chloe came hurrying out from the back offices, looking frazzled as usual with her hair in a messy bun and her blouse untucked. "Les!" she exclaimed in surprise when she saw me. "What are you doing here?" I held up the pizza boxes with a hopeful smile. "Thought I'd stop by with some lunch for my beautiful wife. Maybe we could spend a few minutes together, like we used to?" Chloe glanced over her shoulder, then leaned in to give me a quick peck on the cheek. "That's so sweet of you, babe. But I'm kind of swamped right now with this big project." She took a small step back, folding her arms across her chest. "I really shouldn't be taking a long break." "Well, even just 15 minutes?" I pressed. "We could just sit in the break room together and catch up a little." "I miss you, Chloe." She looked at me with those gorgeous green eyes of hers, the same ones that had captivated me all those years ago at the baseball stadium. For just a fleeting moment, I saw a glimpse of the old Chloe peeking through, my sweet, caring wife who loved me more than anything. But then her gaze hardened again, and she shook her head. "I can't today, Les. I've got back-to-back meetings all afternoon, and I need to prep for them." She started backing away towards the offices again. "But thanks for thinking of me. I'll make it up to you soon, I promise." With that, she disappeared behind the double doors, leaving me alone in the lobby still holding the pizza boxes that had already started to get cold and congealed. I stood there for a long moment, trying to process the sick feeling forming in the pit of my stomach. What the hell was happening to my marriage? Over the next few weeks, I tried to stay positive and give Chloe the time and space she needed to get through this project. But her behavior didn't improve. If anything, she grew even more distant and absorbed in her work. I knew I had to do something big, something to really remind her how much I loved her and cared about our relationship. That's when I got the idea to plan a romantic getaway for us. I made dinner reservations at Chloe's favorite little Italian place downtown, got all dressed up in a suit and tie like I was taking her on a first date all over again. When she arrived home from work that night, I had the whole place decorated with candles and rose petals, her favorite Ella Fitzgerald album playing softly in the background. Chloe's jaw dropped when she walked through the door. "Les, what is all this?" she asked, looking around in amazement. I just grinned, taking her hand and leading her to the candlelit table. "This is for us, sweetheart. A little reminder of how things used to be, and how I want them to be again." Over a delicious 3-course meal, I reminisced about all the great times we'd shared together over the years. Chloe started getting a little misty-eyed as I spoke, and I could see her walls slowly coming down again. Finally, as we were splitting a slice of tiramisu for dessert, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the brochure I'd gotten. "Here's the real surprise," I said, handing it to her. "I want to take you on a second honeymoon, a full week in Punta Cana, just you and me. We'll leave as soon as this big project of yours is finished up. What do you say?" Chloe looked at the pictures of the beautiful Caribbean resort, then back up at me with tears shining in her eyes. "Oh, Les, no, you didn't have to do all this. After how I've been acting lately, I don't deserve." I cut her off, taking her hands in mine from across the table. "Yes, you do deserve it, baby. We both do. We've hit a rough patch, sure, but that doesn't change how much I love you. How much I'll always love you." I gave her hands a gentle squeeze. "So what'd you say? 1 week of pure relaxation, just you and me reconnecting again?" She stared at me for a long moment, those green eyes I loved so much shimmering with emotion. Then, slowly, she nodded her head. "Yes," she whispered, a smile finally breaking through. "Yes, I'd love that more than anything, Les." Over the next couple of weeks, Chloe's project started wrapping up nicely. She seemed a little more at ease, like a weight was slowly being lifted off her shoulders. A few times, I even caught her looking at the Punta Cana brochure I had left on the kitchen counter, a wistful smile playing on her lips. The night before our scheduled flight, Chloe came home positively glowing. "It's done," she exclaimed, throwing her arms around me in a tight hug. "We crushed it, babe. The whole team knocked this project out of the park." I laughed and swung her around, so happy to see that spark back in her eyes again. "That's my girl. I'm so proud of you, Chloe. You worked your tail off for this." She pulled back and gazed at me with such pure adoration, it made my heart swell. "I couldn't have done it without your support, Les. Thank you for everything. For sticking by me when I was being such a nightmare." She cupped my cheek tenderly. "I can't wait to get away with you tomorrow and really reconnect again. You've made me the happiest woman in the world." Hearing her say that made me happier than I could put into words. This vacation was going to be exactly what we needed to get our marriage back on track. Tomorrow, it would be like pushing the reset button on our life together. I couldn't wait. So the next morning, Chloe and I loaded up our bags and headed to the airport, both of us buzzing with excitement for our romantic getaway. We were checking in at the counter when I heard a voice calling out, "Chloe." "Hey, Chloe." I turned to see that blonde frat boy type from Chloe's office, Brad, hurrying towards us with his stupid cocky grin plastered on his face. "Thank God I caught you guys," he said, slightly out of breath. "I really need to talk to you about something, Chloe. It's important." My hackles immediately went up seeing this clown again. Who did he think he was, bothering my wife like this right before our vacation? "Can't it wait, buddy?" I said, trying to keep my tone even. "We're just about to board our flight." Brad barely even looked at me, his eyes locked on Chloe. "I'm afraid it can't, Les. This is kind of a time-sensitive matter." He took a step closer to Chloe, dropping his voice lower. "It's about that proposal I told you about yesterday. There have been some last-minute changes we need to discuss." Chloe looked from him to me, conflicted. I could see the brief flicker of panic in her eyes before she pasted on a reassuring smile. "It's okay, babe," she said, giving my arm a squeeze. "Why don't you go ahead and get us some seats on the plane? I'll just be a couple minutes with Brad here." "Chloe, we're boarding now," I protested. The last thing I wanted was for this jackass to ruin our long-awaited vacation before it even started. "Can it wait until we're back next week? Please, Les?" She looked at me with those big green eyes, and damn it if I could never say no to her when she looked at me like that. I promise, I'll be quick. I don't want to hold up our flight. I sighed heavily, knowing I wasn't going to win this one. All right, fine. But don't take too long, okay? I shot Brad one last glare before turning and heading through the gate. I found our seats towards the middle of the cabin and stowed our carry-on bags in the overhead bin. As the other passengers filtered on, I kept glancing back towards the gate, waiting for Chloe to come breezing down the aisle with that bright smile of hers. But the minutes ticked by with no sign of her. Finally, the gate agent came on the intercom. Folks, that's about all we have for boarding. We're going to go ahead and close up the aircraft now. Please make sure your seats and tray tables are in their upright and locked positions. My heart started pounding in my chest as I looked around desperately, but Chloe's seat next to me remained empty. What the hell was going on? Where was she? I tried calling her cell, but it went straight to voicemail. As the plane pushed back from the gate, I felt sick to my stomach. Something wasn't right here. That Brad guy must have really needed to discuss something major to make Chloe risk missing our flight. But why couldn't he have just waited until we got back? Unless... No. I refused to let my mind go there. Chloe loved me. She had promised we were going to reconnect on this trip. There was no way she would do anything to jeopardize that. I forced myself to take some deep breaths as the plane taxied towards the runway. Chloe would be on the next flight out, I told myself. This was all just a silly misunderstanding. Except when we landed in Punta Cana a few hours later, there was no missed call or text from Chloe waiting for me. As I was gathering my things from the overhead bin, my phone finally buzzed with a new message. It was from Chloe, and it just said, "I'm so sorry, Les. Please read your email when you land." My hands were shaking as I pulled up my email app with a sinking feeling in my gut. There, sitting in my inbox, was a new message from Chloe with the subject line, "My confession." I could barely read the words through the tears blurring my vision. "My dearest Les, I don't know how to tell you this, but I have been having an affair with Brad for the past 4 months. I never intended to fall in love with him, but the more time we spent together on this project, the closer we became." I stopped reading, feeling like I'd been sucker punched in the stomach as the reality hit me. My wife, my Chloe, the love of my life, had been cheating on me with that smarmy little prick Brad. While I was at home cooking her dinners and giving her massages, trying to support her through a stressful time, she was shacking up with her coworker behind my back. How could she do this to me? To us? After everything we'd been through, after all the dreams we'd shared about growing old together? The rest of the email was just a bunch of pathetic excuses and pleading for forgiveness, but I couldn't make it through the rest. The burning sting of betrayal was too much. I stumbled off the plane in a daze, tears streaming down my cheeks. I must have looked like an absolute wreck, because as soon as I entered the airport terminal, I was approached by a couple of security agents. "Sir? Sir, is everything all right?" one of them asked, placing a firm hand on my shoulder. I could barely get the words out as I shook my head, shoving my phone towards the guard. My wife, she left me. For another man. I choked back a sob, feeling like the world's biggest fool. The security guard's expression softened as he glanced at the email on my phone screen. "I'm so sorry, sir," he said gently. "But you're going to need to get a hold of yourself. We can't have you causing a scene here in the airport." "Scene?" I let out a bitter laugh through my tears. "Believe me, pal, you haven't seen anything yet." The other guard must have understood some English, because he leaned in and said something to his partner in Spanish. The first guard nodded, then turned back to me. "My friend here says perhaps it would be better if we took you somewhere more private to calm down, yes? He can explain more on the way." I didn't argue as the two security agents ushered me into a back hallway towards some secluded offices. I was numb at this point, like I was sleepwalking through a horrible nightmare. In that quiet hallway, the guard whose English was better laid out the situation. "My friend could see you were very upset, and he did not want to risk having a scene, as you say, out in the main airport terminal. It would not be good to make the other guests uncomfortable, you understand?" I nodded dumbly, and the guard continued. "We are going to place you in a temporary holding room for now until you have regained your composure. Then we will release you, and you can proceed to your accommodation, yes? A holding room? Were they freaking kidding me? I just had my heart shattered into a million pieces, and now I was being treated like a common criminal? I opened my mouth to protest, but the guard spoke again before I could. I know this is not an ideal situation for you, sir. But you must look at it from our perspective, yes? You are clearly very distraught right now. For everyone's safety, it is best if you are allowed to, how do you say, regain your bearings in a more private setting. I am sure you would not want to alarm the other travelers, families with young children, and so on. As much as it killed me, the guy had a point. I was an utter mess. The last thing I needed was to make things worse by causing a public meltdown in front of a bunch of innocent bystanders. I gave a reluctant nod of agreement, and the guards led me to a plain room with a couple of benches along the walls. Please, make yourself comfortable here, sir, the English-speaking guard said as they ushered me inside. We will return to check on you in 1 hour. If you have regained your composure, you will be free to continue on your way. If not, he shrugged. Well, we will cross that bridge when we come to it, yes? With that, the guard stepped out and closed the door, leaving me alone in that sterile holding room to process the devastating reality that my marriage was over. I sank down onto one of the benches, burying my face in my hands as the anguished sobs racked my body. How could Chloe have done this to me? To us? I don't know how long I sat there crying, dwelling on all the incredible heartache and pain. By the time the guards finally returned to check on me, I was emotionally spent, just a hollowed-out husk of the man who had boarded that plane a few hours ago with such high hopes for the future. The guards must have seen that I was no longer a risk, because they simply nodded and motioned for me to follow them. You may proceed to your accommodations now, sir, the English guard said. We wish you the very best in dealing with your situation. I guess I mumbled some half-hearted thanks as I exited the airport terminal in a daze. A shuttle was waiting to transport guests to the various resorts dotting the beach, and I climbed aboard like a zombie. When the shuttle arrived at the couples-only resort Chloe and I had been booked to stay at, I dragged my suitcase up to the front desk in the open-air lobby. Reservation for Les and Chloe Mitchell, I muttered, sliding my ID and printed reservation across the counter. The peppy young woman at the front desk smiled politely as she typed away at her computer. Ah yes, the honeymoon suite. One of our very best rooms with an ocean view and private jacuzzi on the balcony. She looked up at me expectantly. And I have you down as arriving with your wife today, Mr. Mitchell. Where is the lovely Mrs. Mitchell? My throat tightened, and I had to swallow hard before I could speak. They're not coming, I managed to choke out. It's just me. The woman's overly chipper demeanor faltered as she seemed to pick up on my emotional state. Oh, I see. Well, sir, this is an adults-only couples resort. That is to say, we can't allow single occupancy of the suites. It's a policy to ensure a particular ambiance for our guests. She gave me an apologetic look. I'm afraid without your wife present, I cannot process your check-in. Are you kidding me? After everything I'd been through today, now this? I felt what little composure I had left rapidly slipping away as I glared at the desk clerk. Listen, lady, I growled, slapping the counter in frustration. My wife left me. Okay? She took off with some other guy, so it's just gonna be me for this trip. So why don't you quit worrying about your stupid ambiance and get me a damn room already? The poor woman looked absolutely stricken, shrinking back from my outburst. A few other resort staff members had taken notice and were starting to approach, no doubt preparing to remove the raving lunatic from the premises. I realized I had about 2 seconds to get my shit together before airport security got an encore performance. Thankfully, an older, distinguished-looking man in a suit swooped in to defuse the situation. Is there a problem here? He asked calmly, placing a hand on the visibly shaken desk clerk's shoulder. This gentleman was trying to check in, sir, the woman stammered, still looking rattled. But as you know, we cannot accommodate single occupancy. Only couples or newlyweds. The man in the suit looked at me appraising LY for a moment, seeming to take in my disheveled appearance and red-rimmed eyes. Then understanding seemed to dawn on him. Ah, I see. A rather delicate situation, it would appear. He turned to the desk clerk with the patient demeanor of someone used to handling crisis. "No need to upset yourself, my dear. I will take care of this." With a polite smile and a slight bow of his head, the man addressed me again. "Sir, if you would not mind accompanying me to my office for a brief moment? I believe I can sort this out in a way that is satisfactory for all parties." I must have still looked like I was about to go nuclear, because the man raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Please, sir, you have my word that I intend no disrespect. These policies are in place for good reason, but I also understand your position is quite difficult, shall we say. If you allow me just a few minutes of your time, I will do everything in my power to find a solution." I eyed the man warily, but eventually gave a resigned nod of agreement. Anything to get me away from prying eyes and out of that open lobby. The man smiled and gestured for me to follow him through a door leading to the back offices. "You'll have to forgive Consuela, our front desk associate," the man said as we walked down a quiet hallway. "She is relatively new here and still learning the ropes, as they say. But she is correct. We do have strict policies about only hosting couples or newlyweds at our resort. It's all part of the romantic, intimate experience we aim to provide our guests." He paused, glancing over at me. "Which is why I must admit, I am quite concerned about your situation, sir. This was meant to be a honeymoon or romantic getaway, yes?" I swallowed hard, staring at the floor as we walked. "It was supposed to be," I replied hoarsely. "But my wife, she left me for another man." The man let out a soft sigh, shaking his head slowly. "I cannot begin to express my deepest sympathies, sir. To have one's heart shattered in such a way, it is a pain I would not wish on my worst enemy." He stopped in front of a door marked "Manager" and opened it, gesturing me inside. "Please, have a seat. Let us see what can be done about your accommodations." I sank into one of the plush chairs across from the manager's desk, feeling emotionally and physically drained. The man took a seat behind the desk and steepled his fingers, surveying me thoughtfully. "The way I see it, sir, you have two options here," he began. "The first is that you return home immediately. I would be happy to assist you in booking a return flight and canceling any charges for your stay here, of course." He paused, then continued delicately, "However, I recognize that going home so soon after such a traumatic event may not be what you need right now. Being alone, surrounded by reminders of your former life, could potentially do more harm than good in your current fragile state." He leaned back in his chair with a sympathetic look. "Which brings me to the second option. While I cannot in good conscience allow you to stay in one of our honeymoon suites, that would go against everything we stand for here, I may be able to arrange for you to be housed at our sister property down the beach." I felt a faint glimmer of hope at his words. "You can do that? Even without my wife?" The manager nodded. "It would be a stretch of the rules, I'll admit. But I'm a firm believer that rules are made to be adjusted when the situation calls for compassion. The resort down the beach is still quite lovely, if perhaps not quite at our level of luxury and amenities. More importantly, it does not have the same restrictions about couple-only occupancy. You would simply be another guest there, free to take this trip as you wish with no obligations or expectations." It wasn't exactly the romantic vacation I'd had in mind, but suddenly the thought of being alone in that big house back home felt utterly suffocating. Maybe getting away for a little bit, having some space to process everything, wouldn't be the worst idea. "Okay," I said, making up my mind. "If you can set me up at that other place, I'll stay. For now, at least." The manager gave me a warm smile. "Excellent. Then let me make the necessary arrangements." He picked up his phone and started punching in some numbers. "This may take me a little while to sort out the details and secure your reservation. Perhaps you would like to make use of our hospitality lounge in the meantime? We have an open bar and light refreshments to help you unwind, shall we say?" I couldn't help but let out a bitter chuckle at that. "You know what? I think I'll take you up on that offer." So after getting situated at the other resort down the beach, I knew I needed to start dealing with the practical realities of my situation. As much as I wanted to just lay on the beach with a bottle of rum and drown my sorrows, I had to take action. The first step was finding a good divorce lawyer. Thankfully, my buddy Paul hooked me up with a guy he knew, George Abbott. Straight shooter, take no prisoners type who had a reputation for playing hardball. Just the kind of shark I needed in my corner. I met up with George at his office downtown to go over the details of my case. "Let me get this straight," George said, leaning back in his leather chair. "Your wife carried on a 4-month affair with this coworker of hers, then took off to be with him right before you two were supposed to go on vacation together?" I nodded grimly. "That's the long and short of it, yeah. She sent me this Dear John email confessing everything right after I landed in Punta Cana." George let out a low whistle. Cold-blooded move on her part, I gotta say. Doesn't exactly make her look great in the eyes of the law. He started scribbling some notes down. "Any kids in the picture that could complicate things?" "No kids," I replied with a shake of my head. "Just the two of us." "Well, that simplifies matters at least." George set his pen down and fixed me with an intense look. "Here's what we're gonna do, Les. I'm going to have my associate serve Chloe with divorce papers first thing tomorrow morning. Given the circumstances of her infidelity and abandonment, we're going to pursue a fairly aggressive settlement." I sat up a little straighter at that. "You think you can nail her for alimony or something? Make her pay through the nose for what she did?" "Possibly," George said with a sly grin. "Though to be honest, your best bet is probably going to be recouping monetary damages from her. The expenses from your ruined vacation, my legal fees, that sort of thing. We'll go after every last penny we can get." I had to admit, that prospect gave me a petty sense of satisfaction after the hell Chloe had put me through. "Sounds good to me. Whatever we can stick it to her for." Over the next couple of weeks, George and his team worked quickly to get everything filed and ready for our initial court appearance. I'll never forget the look on Chloe's face when she was served those divorce papers, a mix of shock, shame, and fear all rolled into one. Part of me felt a tiny pang of sadness at seeing her so distraught. But the much bigger part of me was just pissed, knowing she had brought all of this on herself with her selfish actions. When we finally had our day in court, Chloe's lawyer tried pulling out all the stops to paint her as some kind of sympathetic victim. Going on and on about the immense work pressures she was under, how her OCD had spiraled out of control, blah blah blah. I could see George's jaw clenching tighter with each bullshit excuse they trotted out. Finally, it was our turn for cross-examination, and George went for the jugular. "Ms. Mitchell, is it not true that despite your husband's tireless efforts to support you during this allegedly difficult time, cooking meals for you, giving massages, doing housework so you could focus on work, you still made the choice to have an affair with your coworker, Mr. Brad Williams?" Chloe squirmed in her seat, avoiding eye contact. "Well, yes, but..." "And is it not true," George continued, relentless, "that you then chose to abandon your husband at the airport immediately before you were both scheduled to go on a long-awaited vacation together? One which, I might add, my client had paid for in advance out of his own funds." This time, Chloe's eyes flicked over at me for just a moment before dropping her gaze again. "Yes," she said in a small voice. "That's true." George let that admission hang in the air for a few beats, letting it sink in for the judge and anyone else in that courtroom. Then he turned towards the bench with a look of utter disbelief. "Your Honor, I fail to see how any amount of work stress could possibly justify or excuse such cruel, selfish behavior towards one's spouse. Mr. Mitchell has done nothing but love and support his wife through all of her struggles, only to be betrayed and abandoned in the most heartless way imaginable." He shook his head slowly. "This is a clear-cut case of infidelity and spousal abandonment. I would strongly urge the court to consider that when weighing any claims for damages or settlements." I couldn't help but smirk a little, seeing Chloe's lawyer squirming in his seat. He tried to object, but the judge just waved him off with a look of disdain. When all was said and done, the ruling went entirely in my favor. Chloe was ordered to pay me back for the cost of the vacation, George's legal fees, and a few other expenses. More importantly, at least to me, she walked out of that courtroom having been publicly shamed for her actions. After it was over, George clapped me on the shoulder with a proud grin. "See? Told you we'd nail her where it hurts." That's what you get for trying to play games with a bulldog like me. He chuckled to himself as we made our way out to the parking lot. I gotta say, George, you really worked some magic in there today, I told him honestly. I didn't think I had a chance in hell, but you just completely dismantled her case. How'd you manage to get that judge on our side so effectively? George smirked as he unlocked his car door. Let's just say I've had some prior experience with Judge Watkins. She and I went a few rounds in the courtroom back when I was a young pup starting out. Let's just say she's got a real stickler for fidelity and traditional marriage vows. He slid into the driver's seat and looked over at me. Believe me, once I knew we drew her for this case, I played directly to her biases. Oldest trick in the book for a good lawyer: know your judge and know what makes them tick. I shook my head in amazement. Well, whatever voodoo you worked, I owe you big time. You really helped me get a sliver of justice out of this whole nightmare. George waved a dismissive hand. Don't mention it, kid. Just doing my job. He paused, giving me an appraising look. Speaking of jobs, that you got any plans now that this divorce is wrapped up? Any idea what your next move is gonna be? I sighed heavily, running a hand through my hair. Not a clue, to be honest. I was so focused on getting through this mess with Chloe, I didn't really think much past it. I looked at him curiously. Why, you got something in mind? Well, now that I think about it. George scratched at his chin. You know, I could maybe use a new associate around the office. Some fresh blood to learn the ropes from an old pro like me. Assuming, of course, you'd be interested in going to law school to get your credentials. My eyebrows shot up at that. You're offering me a job? At your law firm? Potentially, George said with a shrug. Like I said, you'd have to get your law degree first. But I've been impressed with how you carried yourself through this whole ordeal, Les. You kept your head on straight, even when everything was going to shit around you. That's the kind of level-headedness I prize in my associates. He fixed me with a serious look. It's not gonna be easy, mind you. Law school is a grind, and I'll work you twice as hard as any of those snot-nosed rich kids from the big universities. You'll have to be willing to put in the hours and really prove yourself to me. But if you've got the stomach for it, I could be a hell of a mentor. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Just a couple months ago, my life had been crumbling apart at the seams. And now this grizzled legal pit bull was offering me a potential path to turn my misery into something positive? It was almost too good to be true. George, I don't know what to say, I managed. Are you sure about this? Taking a chance on some working-class schmuck like me? George snorted out a laugh at that. Please, kid. You think I came from money and private schools? He shook his head. I was a broke son of a bitch from the trailer parks, just like you. Worked my ass off to get to where I am today. If you've got that same kind of drive and determination, you could make one hell of a lawyer. He held up a finger in warning. But don't think for 1 second that means I'll go easy on you, Mitchell. You'll need to bring your A game every single day, you hear me? I'll ride your ass harder than a rented mule to get you whipped into shape. I couldn't help but grin at that, feeling a surge of excitement and motivation I hadn't felt in a long time. You got a deal, George. I'm in, 100%. Just tell me what I need to do. George smirked and started up his car. That's what I like to hear, kid. We'll get the paperwork started for your law school applications first thing in the morning. After that, he chuckled darkly. After that, your ass is mine. Hope you're ready for the grind of your life. Little did I know just how prophetic those words would turn out to be. Over the next few years, George was as good as his word. He ran me into the ground with an insane workload, both at law school and as his personal associate at the firm. Countless nights of cramming for exams, writing briefs, doing research for cases. If it wasn't for George's occasional attaboy and gruff words of encouragement, I might have cracked under the pressure. But I persevered, channeling all the pain and anger from my divorce into my studies. I wasn't just doing this for me, it was for Chloe, too. To prove to that cheating liar that she hadn't broken me, no matter how hard she tried. I was going to take the second chance George gave me and run with it as far as I could. Of course, that didn't mean my personal life was all smooth sailing from there on out. In between studying my ass off and putting in long hours at the firm, I tried dipping my toes back into the dating pool. Most of the time, it was an absolute disaster. Like there was this one woman, Sheila, who I met at a bar not too long after the divorce was finalized. We really hit it off over drinks, trading stories and laughing together until last call. When she invited me back to her place, I figured, what the hell? I'm still a young guy, I can do this casual thing. Except when we got to Sheila's apartment, I noticed the pile of men's shoes by the front door and the masculine leather jacket slung over the back of the couch. As she started undressing me with hungry kisses, I finally had to stop her. "Hey, Sheila," I said, gently pushing her away. "Does your husband, did you know about me being here?" She froze, eyes going wide for a second. Then her shoulders slumped in defeat. "You're not? Oh, God. Look, my husband's been deployed in Afghanistan for the past 6 months. I've been so lonely, and you just seemed so sweet at the bar, and I thought maybe." Sheila trailed off, looking utterly mortified. I just shook my head, feeling like a world-class schmuck. "Hey, no, it's okay. I get it, I do." I took her hand and gave it a comforting squeeze. "But you don't want to do anything you might regret, you know? Anything that could risk throwing away your marriage over a one-night fling." Tears started welling up in Sheila's eyes as she nodded jerkily. "You're right, you're absolutely right. God, what was I thinking?" She buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with muffled sobs. Without even thinking about it, I pulled Sheila into a warm hug, just holding her for a few long moments as she cried. "Shush, it's all right," I murmured. "Being apart for so long like that, it's gotta be so damn hard. You're only human, Sheila." Eventually, her sobs subsided, and she pulled back with a watery smile. "Thank you," she said softly. For being so understanding. And for stopping me from doing something incredibly stupid that I'd regret forever." I just smiled back, giving her shoulder a squeeze. "Don't mention it. Why don't you tell me a little more about this husband of yours? Seems like a pretty lucky guy from where I'm sitting." Sheila and I ended up staying up most of the night, me just listening as she talked about her husband and how head over heels in love they were. How much she missed him and worried about him being overseas. By the time I finally left her place the next morning, I felt, I don't know, proud of myself, I guess, for being able to provide that emotional support when she needed it most. Even if it meant denying my own desires in the process. That's just the kind of guy the first tried to be from then on, the dependable friend, the supportive shoulder to cry on. Sure, it made for some lonely nights back at my apartment, just me and my law books for company. But I'd been through too much heartache and pain to ever want to intentionally cause that for someone else again. There were times when I wondered if I'd ever be able to open myself up to that level of vulnerability and commitment after what Chloe did to me. Like when my buddy Paul started pushing me to get back out on the dating apps, saying I needed to get back on the horse, and all that typical guy advice. I'd just shake my head and change the subject, not ready to go there yet. Then one night, I ended up at this chamber orchestra concert on campus, a Vivaldi piece, if I'm remembering right. It was for some extra credit in one of my music appreciation courses, and I had honestly been dreading it. Figured it would be 2 hours of falling asleep in an uncomfortable auditorium seat, surrounded by snobby rich kids who didn't appreciate how lucky they were. But that's when I first laid eyes on Grace. So there I was at this chamber orchestra concert, trying my best not to nod off as the musicians played their little hearts out. Just another requirement to check off the list for this stupid music appreciation class, you know? But then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed her, this tiny, almost pixie-like woman with long, dark hair taking a seat just a couple rows ahead of me. Even from behind, there was just something about her, a sort of effortless grace and poise that seemed out of place in a room full of bored college kids. When the orchestra took their intermission, the mysterious woman turned around, giving me a glimpse of her face for the first time. And man, was she beautiful, big, soulful eyes, a warm smile that just lit up her whole expression. Before I knew what I was doing, I found myself getting up and making my way over to her row. "Excuse me, miss?" I said, feeling a little lame even as the words came out. I don't mean to bother you, but I just had to say, you seem to be one of the few people here who's actually appreciating the music. She blinked up at me for a second, then let out this tinkling laugh that made my heart skip a beat. Well, thank you. Though I must admit, I may be a bit biased. Oh. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Are you some kind of music expert or something? Not at all, she said with a shake of her head, sending her dark curls bouncing around her shoulders. I just play the cello, so I have a particular fondness for these kinds of chamber pieces. No kidding? You must be pretty talented, then. I couldn't help but grin, feeling that spark of connection between us. I'm Les, by the way. Les Mitchell. Grace, she replied warmly, holding out her hand for me to shake. Grace Adamson. It's a pleasure to meet you, Les. Her soft hand lingered in mine perhaps a beat too long, almost like neither of us wanted to let go just yet. Feeling emboldened, I gestured towards the row of seats in front of us. You know, they just opened up a beer garden right across the street. If you're not in a huge hurry after this, I could buy you a drink? Maybe you could tell me a little more about this secret cello talent of yours. Grace looked surprised for just a moment, then her smile widened. You know what? I think I'd like that very much. And just like that, we ended up grabbing a table together at this cozy little pub right across from campus. As we sipped our drinks, Grace told me all about how she'd grown up in a hippie commune outside of Carbondale with her parents, who had given her the unique name as a nod to the singer Grace Slick from Jefferson Airplane. She'd been playing cello since she was a kid, but her true passion was for art and animation. That's actually what I'm here at State studying, she explained, brushing a stray curl away from her face. I'm working on getting my master's degree so I can eventually get into animated filmmaking, maybe even work for a big studio like Pixar someday. I couldn't help but grin at her infectious enthusiasm. That's awesome, Grace. I can totally picture you doing something like that. Your art must be incredible. I shook my head in amazement. You've got all these amazing talents, and here I am just slogging through law school, hoping I don't flunk out and have to become a mall cop or something. Oh, stop. Grace giggled, giving me a playful swat on the arm. I'm sure that's not true at all. Why don't you tell me a little more about yourself, Les Mitchell? I feel like there's got to be an interesting story there. So I told Grace all about my background, how I'd grown up in a working-class family, the son of a factory worker. How I'd met my ex-wife Chloe years ago at a baseball game and thought we'd have this perfect life together until she cheated on me with a coworker. The long road through the divorce and finally deciding to chase my dream of becoming a lawyer with the help of my mentor, George. Wow, Grace murmured when I'd finished, her eyes wide with amazement. Les, I don't even know what to say. That's one hell of a journey you've been on. She reached across the table and gave my hand a comforting squeeze. I'm so sorry you had to go through all that with your ex-wife. But it sounds like you've picked yourself up and really turned things around. That's incredibly inspiring. I just shrugged, giving her hand a squeeze back. I'm just taking it one day at a time, you know? Trying to make the most of this second chance I've been given. I grinned at her. Although meeting a fascinating, talented woman like yourself is definitely helping to make the struggle worthwhile. Grace blushed prettily at that, ducking her head for a moment before meeting my gaze again. You know, Les, I think this is the start of a wonderful friendship. Over the next few weeks, Grace and I did indeed forge a surprisingly deep connection despite our different backgrounds and stages of life. We made a point to grab drinks or coffee together whenever our schedules allowed, and I was constantly amazed by her warmth, her kindness, her endless wellspring of creativity. One day, she came over to my place, an old farmhouse I was renting just outside of town. While I whipped us up some sandwiches for lunch, Grace wandered out back to explore the yard. By the time the food was ready, she came bounding back in, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Les, you'll never believe what I just saw. You've got an entire garden plot out back, just waiting to be tilled and planted. She grabbed my hands, practically bouncing up and down. Oh, you have to let me start a garden back there. There's nothing more relaxing or rewarding than getting your hands in the soil, watching things grow and blossom under your care. It's like a spiritual experience, you know? I couldn't help but laugh at her infectious enthusiasm, squeezing her hands back. You know what, Grace? You've got yourself a deal. My sad little garden plot is all yours. Work your magic on it. Her face lit up with pure joy, and she threw her arms around me in a tight hug. Thank you, Les. You have no idea how much this means to me. I just smiled and hugged her back, already looking forward to whatever beauty and life she would breathe into that neglected corner of my property. A few weeks later, Grace invited me to join her at a student art exhibit being held on campus. As we wandered the gallery space, I couldn't help but be a little taken aback by some of the more avant-garde pieces. Geez, what is this one supposed to be? I muttered, gesturing to some bizarre sculpture made of twisted metal and what looked like shredded tires. Modern art is just weird sometimes. Grace just laughed and looped her arm through mine as we continued on. Oh, don't be such a fuddy-duddy, Les. A lot of it is just meant to be provocative, you know? Get people talking and thinking in new ways. She stopped in front of one of her own paintings, this incredible abstract work full of bold colors and sweeping brushstrokes. Like this piece I call The Last Day of Lovers. What do you think it evokes for you? I studied the canvas for a long moment, a slight ache tinging my heart as my mind couldn't help but go back to those final, agonizing days with Chloe before our marriage shattered. I don't know, a sense of chaos, maybe? Like the world you knew is crumbling all around you, and you're just trying to hold on to whatever scraps of beauty you can. Grace's eyes softened, and she gave my arm a comforting squeeze. I'm so sorry, Les. I didn't even think. This must dredge up a lot of painful memories for you, after what you went through. Shaking my head, I managed a small smile for her. No, don't apologize. Your art is incredible, Grace. Evoking those strong emotions, even the tough ones, that's the whole point, isn't it? She beamed at me, so full of gratitude and admiration. In that moment, I knew that no matter what had happened in my past, Grace had helped open my heart again to experience beauty, to find joy in unexpected places. As we wandered over to another exhibit, this incredible animated short film of an underwater scene that took my breath away, I couldn't help but feel a surge of affection for this remarkable woman. Our friendship was quickly becoming one of the most important, grounding forces in my life. Which is why, a few weeks later, I decided to take a risk and ask her something that had been on my mind for a while. Hey, Grace, I said one night as we were having dinner together. I've been meaning to ask, your lease on that apartment is almost up, right? With your roommates graduating soon? She nodded, swirling her wine around in her glass. Yeah, that's right. I've got to find a new place after next month. She looked at me curiously. Why, you got something in mind? I cleared my throat, suddenly feeling nervous. Well, I was just thinking. This place has an extra bedroom that isn't being used for anything. If you wanted, you could, move in here. Rent out that second room from me, split some of the utility costs? Grace's eyes widened in surprise. Live here? With you? She didn't say anything for a beat, and I felt panic starting to set in. Only if you want to, of course. I rushed to add. No pressure at all. I just thought I'd extend the offer since we're such good friends, and it would be way cheaper for you than finding a new place alone. But I totally understand if that's too weird or... Les, Grace cut me off with a laugh, reaching across the table to take my hand and give it a squeeze. I think it's a wonderful idea. I'd love to move in here with you, if you're sure you don't mind having me as a roommate. I let out a relieved breath, returning her smile. Are you kidding? I can't think of anyone I'd rather share this place with. Over the next couple of weeks, we ironed out all the details, how we'd split rent and bills, divvying up chores and responsibilities around the house, that sort of thing. And I'll admit, there was a tiny part of me that hoped it might also open the door for something more to develop between us. Don't get me wrong, I valued Grace's friendship more than anything and never wanted to risk losing her from my life. But the more time we spent together, the more I started to have feelings for her that went beyond the platonic. She was just so compassionate, so caring, so full of life and warmth, everything Chloe hadn't been towards the end of our marriage. The way Grace would absent-mindedly tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, the adorable little crinkle of her nose when she laughed at my dumb jokes, the way her entire face would light up with passion anytime she talked about her art. It was impossible for me not to start falling for her, however hopeless I knew it was. Because as incredible as Grace was, she was also about 10 years younger than me, and clearly at a very different stage of her life. While I was pushing 40 and still reeling from my failed marriage, she was this young, vibrant spirit with her whole world ahead of her. What possible reason could she have for wanting to be tied down to some world-weary divorcee like me? I knew I had to keep my feelings in check and just be grateful for her friendship. At least, that's what I thought until the day Grace was moving her stuff into the farmhouse. I was hauling one of her bigger trunks up to her new bedroom when I nearly tripped over the doorway and dropped the whole thing. Suddenly, Grace was there, her small hands gripping my arm to steady me. "Whoa there, Les. You okay?" she asked, concerned eyes searching my face. "Why yeah," I stammered, very aware of the warmth of her touch through my thin t-shirt sleeve. "I'm fine, just lost my footing for a sec." Grace bit her lower lip, not releasing her grasp on my arm. "You know, you don't have to try and be the big strong man for me all the time. We're roommates now. That means we're a team, remember? We help each other out." She stepped in closer, so close that I could smell the faint, intoxicating scent of her shampoo. "So no more of this macho lone wolf act, okay? From now on, you lean on me just as much as I'll lean on you." My mouth went dry as I gazed down into those warm brown eyes, her face just inches away from mine. In that moment, I knew she had to feel what I was feeling, this magnetic pull towards each other that went far beyond simple friendship or even roommates. Then, before I could lose my nerve, I closed that final distance between